The bag split on the third punch. Not a tear along a seam, not a slow leak. A split. A clean, sudden rupture that sent a thin cloud of stuffing across the mat like a vapor trail. The chain holding the bag to the ceiling bracket shuddered and went still. The gym went still with it. Dawson Briggs stood back and looked at what he had done. He was breathing through his nose, controlled and measured the way you breathe when you are not even close to your limit. He rolled his right shoulder, then his left. He looked around at the dozen fighters who had stopped what they were doing to watch. Then he grinned. It was a good grin, wide and easy and aware of itself. The grin of a man who knew he was being watched and had decided to enjoy it. He pointed across the room. He pointed at the old man on the bench in the back corner. The one in the leather vest. The one with the gray beard and the cane leaning against the wall beside him, and the bad knee that he favored when he walked, which was not often, because mostly he just sat there and watched and drank from a battered aluminum water bottle and did not appear to notice or care about anything happening on the rest of the floor. Dawson Briggs was 28 years old. He was the welterweight champion of 3 regional promotions across the American Southwest. His record was 18 wins and 0 losses. 12 of those wins had come before the final bell. He had a fight coming up in Las Vegas against a nationally ranked contender, and if he won that fight, he was going to be offered a contract with one of the major organizations. He had come to Desert Iron MMA in Tucson specifically because Desert Iron was one of the best training facilities in the region, and because his head trainer Slade Monroe had connections there going back 15 years. He had been at Desert Iron for 2.5 weeks. In that time, he had broken 2 heavy bags and cracked the padding on one of the practice cage fences. He had submitted 4 training partners in grappling rounds and knocked the headgear off a 5th with a body shot. The man said he had felt in his back teeth. He had arrived every morning before anyone else and left every evening after the lights were on their timer. He had done everything right, except for the pointing. The bench in the back corner had been the one thing at Desert Iron that Dawson had not understood from his first day. It sat against the east wall below a coat hook that had a leather vest hanging from it. The vest was black and worn at the collar and the sleeves. It had patches on it that you could see from 10 feet away, but could not quite read unless you walked up close, and nobody at Desert Iron walked up close to look at those patches if they could help it. The man who wore the vest came in 5 mornings a week, sometimes 6. He arrived at 8 and left around 10, and in those 2 hours he stretched on the mat for 45 minutes, worked through a slow circuit of bodyweight movements, rode the stationary bike for 20 minutes, and then sat on the bench and drank his water and did not talk to anyone unless they talked to him first. Almost nobody talked to him first. His name was Vance Holden. He was 68 years old. He stood 6 feet and 2 inches in his boots, and he was broad through the chest and shoulders in the way that men get broad when they have been doing physical work their entire lives. Not the kind of broad that comes from years of deliberate lifting, but the deeper kind, the structural kind, the kind that is built into the architecture of a man, the way steel is built into a bridge. His hair was mostly gray, pulled back in a short tail at the base of his skull. His beard was gray and reached his collarbone, and was usually neatly trimmed in a way that suggested he still paid attention to things like that. His eyes were a very light gray, almost colorless in certain light, and they had the quality of resting on things rather than looking at them. The way a rock rests on the bottom of a clear stream. He walked with a cane some days, a black aluminum cane with a rubber grip that he had bought at a pharmacy and had not yet replaced with anything better. His left knee was the problem. He had gone in for a full replacement in March, and the orthopedic surgeon at the VA had been direct about what came next. Movement or stiffness, work or atrophy. The choice was his. Vance had chosen work. He had shown up at Desert Iron on a Monday in April. He had spoken to Emmett Gallagher, who owned the gym and had run it for 22 years, and Emmett had given him a membership without asking for a credit card and without asking what he planned to do with the space. They had shaken hands in a way that suggested they had met before, or that Emmett knew who he was dealing with without needing an introduction. Vance had been working the post-surgery protocol every morning since April. It was now early October. His knee was improving. The cane was becoming more of a habit than a necessity. On most days, though, he kept it close because a bad step on a wet mat could undo 3 months of work, and he was not a young man, and he understood the math on recovery at 68. He wore the leather vest because he had always worn the leather vest when he was not in the field, or in court, or somewhere formal. He had worn it for 41 years. It was as natural to him as skin. The patches on the vest told a story that Vance did not volunteer to strangers. A diamond patch on the upper left chest, a rocker at the bottom that named the Iron Piston Motorcycle Club, and below that, a second rocker that named a territory stretching from the Nevada state line down into northern Arizona. A set of cross pistons above the diamond. Various smaller patches that meant specific things to people who knew what they meant and meant nothing to people who did not. Vance Holden had been a full-patch member of Iron Piston MC for 41 years. Before that, before the club, he had been a Marine, Force Reconnaissance, the kind of unit that does not appear in official press releases and whose operations in certain years remain classified for reasons that have more to do with diplomacy than with danger, because the danger was not a secret to anyone who was there. Vance had done 2 tours. The second one had been the longer one. He had come back with a Bronze Star and a collection of experiences that he kept in a part of his mind that was organized and sorted and filed away behind a door he had learned to keep closed, not locked. Locked meant you were still fighting it. Just closed. The way you close a door on a room that has been cleaned and put in order and does not need your attention anymore. After the Marines, he had spent 6 years as a hand-to-hand combat instructor for 2 different reconnaissance battalions. He had taught at a base in Southern California, and the curriculum he taught was not from any single martial art. It was a system assembled from pieces, from what the military had developed, from what he had learned in the field, from things he had been taught by men who had survived things that should not have been survivable, and who had figured out in real time what actually worked when the other man was not cooperating. He had been good at teaching it. The men who had come through his curriculum had gone on to do things in the field that their unit commanders could not fully explain in their after-action reports, because the explanation would have required the commander to describe a kind of competence that did not fit into the available categories. Vance had not followed their careers. He had not needed to. He knew what he had given them, and he trusted the giving. There had been one man near the end of his time at the base, a corporal from Montana named Garrett, who had stayed after a session one evening and asked Vance how long he had been doing this. Vance had thought about the question. He had said, "I've been teaching it for 3 years. I've been using it for 12. Garrett had looked at him and said, "Is there a difference?" Vance had looked back and said, "Yes. The teaching is what makes it real. Until you have to put it in someone else's body, you don't fully understand what you have." He had never forgotten that conversation. Garrett had been killed 6 months later in a place Vance could not name to anyone who asked. He was 24 years old. Vance had attended the funeral and had not said anything at the service because there was nothing to say, and he had known that and had gone anyway because presence without words is still presence. Then he had left and joined Iron Piston, and for 41 years he had not taught it to anyone. Dawson did not know any of this. What Dawson knew was what he could see, which was a bench with a man on it and a vest on a hook and a cane leaning against the wall and a water bottle that got refilled twice in 2 hours from a small cooler the man kept beside the bench. He had observed these things with the peripheral attention of someone who has decided something is not relevant to him and is confirming that decision through casual observation. What Vance knew was considerably more because Vance had been watching Dawson with his full attention for 2 weeks, which was a different thing from the peripheral attention Dawson was paying him. He had watched Dawson's jab. It was a good jab, technically sound fast off the shoulder, and it had a habit of pulling slightly left at the extension point that Dawson had compensated for by rotating his shoulder at the last moment in a way that was nearly invisible, and that worked well enough that it had not cost him anything in 18 fights. But that would cost him eventually against someone who could see it and use it. He had watched Dawson's double leg, an excellent shot, powerful and committed with a drive-through that was among the best he had seen in a fighter this size. The problem was the same problem that most strong takedown artists have, which is that the strength of the shot creates a dependency on the strength, and when the strength is not enough, the shooter has no contingency because he has never needed one. He had watched Dawson's footwork, which was athletic and aggressive, and organized around the forward pressure that was his primary tool. And he had noticed in the way that a man who has thought very carefully about footwork for many years notices these things, that the pressure was slightly ahead of the balance point in a way that was efficient for the style, but that a specific kind of redirection could exploit with a minimum of force. He had thought about this for 2 weeks. He had decided not to say anything. It was not his gym. It was not his fighter. He was there to work his knee and sit on the bench. And then the kid had pointed across the room and walked over and been rude about it. And Vance had looked at him and seen underneath the ego and the noise, the thing he had identified in the first week of watching. The right engine. Dawson did not know any of this. Dawson had seen the old man on the bench on his first morning at Desert Iron and had thought that bench space would be better used by a working fighter. He had asked Emmett who the man was. Emmett had said a regular, "Don't mess with him." Dawson had laughed. "He looks like a sitting target." Emmett had not laughed. He had gone back behind his desk and found something else to look at. That had been 2.5 weeks ago. In the gym, the 2.5 weeks of Dawson Briggs had produced a particular atmosphere. Not a bad one exactly, more like the atmosphere that forms around any strong personality when they arrive somewhere that already has an established culture. The fighters who had been at Desert Iron for years had developed their own rhythms, their own hierarchies of respect, their own language for talking about who was good and how good and in what way. Dawson had arrived and been immediately undeniably excellent and had also immediately undeniably made it clear that he knew it. Most of the gym had chosen to tolerate this because toleration was easier than confrontation, and because the Vegas fight was a real opportunity, and because if Dawson won it, it brought a kind of reflected credit to the gym that Emmett could use to recruit. Gyms are ecosystems. An ecosystem adjusts to new species. But there was something in the way Dawson pointed across the room that the ecosystem had been waiting for. Not hoping for exactly. More the way a room waits for the thing that has been building to finally happen so that the building can stop and something else can begin. Now it was a Tuesday morning in October and the gym was half full and the split bag was swaying gently on its chain and Dawson Briggs was pointing at Vance Holden. And every person in Desert Iron MMA knew that what came next was not going to go the way Dawson Briggs believed it was going to go. Every person except Dawson. He walked across the gym with his hands still wrapped. His knuckles were red through the cloth. His shoulders were loose and easy, and his stride had the spring of a man who had been throwing hard for 40 minutes and was not close to tired. He stopped in front of the bench. Vance was unwrapping a piece of athletic tape from around his left thumb. He did not look up. "Hey," Dawson said. Vance did not look up. "I'm talking to you." Vance finished with the tape, pressed the loose end down, looked up. His eyes settled on Dawson with the same quality they settled on everything else. Patient, still. Not cold exactly, but the opposite of warm in the way that a neutral temperature is the opposite of warm. "Help you," he said. "Yeah," Dawson said. "I've been watching you. You come in here every morning, you do your thing, you sit on that bench. And I keep thinking that guy has done something. You got that look, soldier look, fighter look. You know the one." Vance did not confirm or deny the look. "So I figured," Dawson said, "today's the day we find out. Just some light sparring. Touch and go, nothing serious. I'll be careful." Vance set the tape on the bench beside him. He looked at the vest on the hook behind him and then back at Dawson. "No, thank you." Dawson spread his hands. "Come on, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I just need good work. The guys in here," he glanced toward the cages where Knox Decker and Reed Carver had stopped what they were doing to watch. "They hold back. They're nervous. You're not nervous. I can see that. So come on, help a guy out." "I said no thank you," Vance said. The second no was quieter than the first. Not louder. Quieter. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. The kind of quiet that in other circumstances might have told Dawson something. It did not tell Dawson anything. Slade Monroe had appeared at the edge of the mat area. Slade was 47, ex-Golden Gloves had trained fighters for 19 years. He was watching Dawson with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and was not quite succeeding. He did not step in. He had learned over his time at Desert Iron when to let things run and when to interrupt them. And this was one of the times he was genuinely uncertain which was correct. Dawson leaned a little closer to Vance. He dropped his voice, not because he was being considerate, because he was being strategic. He thought quiet meant serious. He thought serious would work better. "Look," he said, "I got a fight coming up in Vegas. Big one, top 10 contender. If I win, I'm looking at a major contract. I've been in here 3 weeks and I'm working my tail off and I need real work, real resistance. Not guys who've decided to be careful because they're worried about their records. I need somebody who's going to push back." Vance looked at him for a moment. "Find somebody your own age." He picked up the water bottle and took a drink. The phrase "find somebody your own age" went into Dawson's ear and rearranged itself into something else. It rearranged into "I am afraid of you." It rearranged into "I know I can't hang." It rearranged into "I am soft and I would like you to leave me alone." At 28 years old, with the 18 wins and no losses, and a Vegas fight on the horizon, Dawson Briggs did not have a mechanism for hearing that kind of statement any other way. His ego was not a character flaw exactly. It was a tool he had built and refined and used to get himself to the place he was standing right now. But a tool used in the wrong situation becomes a liability, and he was standing in exactly the wrong situation and he could not see it. He stood up straight. He looked back at Knox and Reed, who were both watching. He looked at Slade, who had now taken 3 steps toward the bench, and then stopped, his face carefully empty. Dawson looked back at Vance. "Nah," he said. "Here's what I think. I think you sit there in that vest like it means something. Like that bench is your throne and everybody's supposed to walk around you because you're old and you've got that cane and that look. And the whole gym plays along because what they're being polite, they feel sorry for you. That's not respect, man. That's pity." The gym had gone quiet without anyone deciding to make it quiet. It had happened the way weather happens. The bag stopped swinging. The mitts went still. The conversations at the front desk trailed into nothing. Emmett Gallagher appeared from the back hallway. He had not been summoned. He had a sense for his gym the way a man gets a sense for a building he has spent 22 years in. He could feel the shift in the air even from the back office. He came out and saw what was happening, and he stopped, and he looked at Vance, and then at Dawson, and then back at Vance, and he did not say anything. He had known Vance for a long time. He knew better than to step in front of what was already in motion. Vance set down his water bottle. He put both hands on his knees. He stood up. He stood up slowly with the specific care of a man who has a knee that requires attention. And he steadied himself, and then he reached back and unhooked the vest from the wall hook and set it folded on the bench. He did not reach for the cane. "All right," he said. Dawson's grin came back. "All right. All right, let's see what you've got." That sound went through the gym. Not a gasp, not a cheer. Something in between, or something different from either the specific sound of multiple people simultaneously revising their understanding of a situation. Slade stopped walking. Emmett at the hallway entrance put one hand flat on the wall beside him, the way you put a hand on a wall when you need a moment of steadiness. Vance walked toward the practice mat area in the back corner. Not the cage, the open mats. Blue canvas squares, 12 feet by 12, no fence, no ropes, just the space and what you brought into it. He walked like an old man. That was the thing everyone saw. The knee was there. The slight drag on the left side was there. He moved carefully, deliberately, the measured movement of a man who has learned to pay attention to what his body is telling him. Dawson followed. He was almost bouncing. He glanced at Knox and Reed, who had both come closer. Knox had his arms crossed and was watching with an expression that could not decide between amusement and unease. Reed was not smiling at all. He had a phone in his hand, but had not raised it yet. Vance stepped onto the mat. He stood in the center and bent down slowly, carefully, and adjusted the neoprene brace on his knee. He pulled the strap tight, secured the Velcro. He straightened. He looked at Dawson. Dawson was across from him, bouncing lightly on his toes. The wraps on his hands were still on. He had not bothered to put gloves back on because this was casual, this was fun, this was the old man doing something he could put on a highlight reel later, under the title, "Watch What Happens When You Poke the Bear." Except he was the bear in this version, obviously. "Light contact," Dawson said. "I won't go to the head, just moving." Vance nodded once. Dawson moved first. He always moved first. Pressure and forward momentum were the cornerstones of his style. Cut the space, make the other man react, control the exchange, end it in your favor. It had worked in 18 fights. It had been working all morning on the bag. He threw a stiff jab, straight fast with the weight of his upper body behind it the way he had been trained to throw it. He did not make contact. Not because Vance blocked it, not because Vance parried it. Vance was not where the jab landed. He had moved his head approximately 4 inches to the left, while Dawson's fist was still in the air, and the movement was small enough and quiet enough that it barely registered as movement. It registered as Vance simply being somewhere he had not been a moment ago. And while Dawson's fist was still completing its travel, Vance's right hand came up and wrapped around Dawson's wrist. Not a grab, not a clench. The way you lay your hand on a railing. Calmly. with the certainty of someone who knows exactly what the railing is for. Then Vance pulled, just slightly. The mechanics of what happened next were simple. Dawson's front foot came forward when it should not have. His shoulder rolled when it should not have. His center of gravity shifted 6 inches past where it needed to be for him to control what his body was doing. He was not off balance in the dramatic, obvious way of someone who has been shoved. He was off balance in the precise surgical way of someone whose balance has been taken from them without their consent or notice. His ribs were exposed, the left side completely open. He knew what was supposed to come next. He had been in this position before in training and fights. He knew the inventory of things a skilled fighter does to a man whose ribs are open. He braced for it. Nothing came. What came instead was Vance's left hand. Open, palm flat, it settled on the back of Dawson's neck. Not a strike, not a grab. The way you put a hand on the back of someone's neck when you are guiding them somewhere, when you are steering. It steered Dawson forward and down, 3 small steps, 1, 2, 3, like being walked somewhere on a path you had not chosen and could not exit. And then Dawson's knees were on the mat. In the center of the mat, he had not fallen, he had been placed. He looked up. Vance was already stepping back. He was standing 4 feet away with his hands at his sides and his weight distributed evenly on both feet and his face wearing the same expression it had worn on the bench. The exchange had taken between 3 and 4 seconds. Around the mat, the gym had achieved a quality of silence that was different from the pre-match quiet. That quiet had been anticipatory. This quiet was something else. It was the quiet of comprehension arriving in a large group of people at different speeds and settling into the room like sediment in water. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The speakers had been playing something when the exchange started. Nobody had turned them off, but somehow nobody was hearing them. Dawson stood up. His face had changed. The grin was gone. What had replaced it was a specific expression that Slade Monroe had seen before on fighters in the 6th round of a bad fight. The expression of a man whose internal narrative has been interrupted mid-sentence and who does not yet have a new sentence ready. "All right," Dawson said. His voice was even. He was giving himself credit for that. "I wasn't set. Let's go again." Vance nodded. Dawson reset his stance. He took a breath. He recalibrated. He told himself what he needed to tell himself, which was that the old man had caught him off guard, and that surprise was not the same as skill, and that nothing that had happened in the last 4 seconds was going to happen again, because now he was paying attention. And when Dawson Briggs paid full attention, there was not a man at his weight who could stop what was coming. He shot for a takedown, double leg. His best shot, the one that had ended 6 of his 18 fights before the judges ever needed to score a card. His shoulder hit Vance's hip. His arms wrapped around the backs of Vance's thighs. His legs drove forward with every pound of force he could produce. Vance did not go down. That was the second thing. Dawson's shoulder was driving into a hip that was not moving. His arms were around legs that felt like they had been planted in the floor by something deeper than bone and muscle. He drove harder. He dug with his legs. He pushed with his back. Nothing. And then in a way that Dawson could not have described afterward to anyone's satisfaction, including his own, he was the one on the ground. Vance had turned, a small turn, a few inches of rotation at the hips, and Dawson's momentum, which had been building and finding nothing to push against, had simply carried him past Vance and into the mat. Face down, before his hands could get under him, Vance was on his back, knees on either side of his spine, one arm laid across the back of Dawson's neck, the other hand resting on his wrist. Not gripping, resting, the way you rest a hand on a table. "Tap," Vance said. Dawson tapped. Vance got off him, stood, stepped back. 8 seconds, 2 takedowns, 2 complete losses of control. Not a single one of Dawson's strikes had made contact. Around the mat, the gym was holding itself very still. Someone near the back had lowered their phone. Not Reed. Reed had not raised his in the first place. Knox had uncrossed his arms, and his expression had settled into something that was not amusement at all. Slade Monroe was standing with his arms at his sides and his chin down, looking at Vance with the focused attention of someone filing something carefully away. Dawson got up. His face was somewhere new, past confused, past surprised, in a territory that did not have a name he was familiar with. He had been hit harder in fights. He had been put on the ground harder in fights. He had been in positions that were worse, technically speaking, than the two positions he had just been in. None of that was what was happening in his chest right now. What was happening was this: he could not read Vance Holden. He could not read him. Dawson had been fighting his whole life. He had started in the backyard at 12 and been competing by 16 and had spent the 12 years between then and now reading fighters. It was a skill he had developed the way some men develop an ear for music or an eye for construction. He could watch a man for 30 seconds and tell you his weak side. He could watch a man throw 2 punches and map out the next 4 moves. He had watched tape on upcoming opponents and built game plans in under an hour that his trainer had called the best he had ever seen from a non-coach. He had watched Vance Holden for 8 seconds and he had nothing. No read, no map, no game plan. Because Vance had not done anything recognizable. He had not boxed. He had not wrestled. He had not used any of the positions or transitions or mechanics that Dawson had been studying and practicing and competing in for 12 years. He had used something that was adjacent to all of those things, but older and quieter and structured differently at the foundation, the way a language you do not speak might share some words with a language you do and still be completely incomprehensible. And the other thing, the thing that was crawling around in the back of Dawson's skull, Vance had not tried to hurt him. Not once, not for a moment. He had put Dawson on the ground twice in 8 seconds, and at no point in those 8 seconds had he done anything that was designed to inflict pain or damage. He had not punched, he had not kicked, he had not kneed or elbowed, he had simply controlled. He had placed Dawson where he wanted Dawson to be with the offhand efficiency of a man who has done this so many times that effort has ceased to be a relevant concept. That was the part that was doing something strange to Dawson's understanding of himself. He set his stance. "Best of 3, he said. Vance looked at him. "Best of 3, Vance said very quietly in the way a man speaks when he is trying to give someone an out without making the out obvious. "Son, walk away. I'm not the lesson you want today." "Best of 3, Dawson said. Vance looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. This time Dawson did not move first. He had learned that much in 8 seconds. He stayed in his stance and he breathed and he waited. He had watched tape on himself. He knew that his forward movement was the thing that gave his intentions away. So he held. He breathed. He watched Vance. Vance stood in the center of the mat with his hands at his sides. Not raised, not in any guard position Dawson recognized. Just at his sides. Waiting. 5 seconds. 10. The gym was so quiet that the air conditioning was audible. The music had stopped at some point without anyone doing anything about it. The ambient hum of the building had become the loudest sound in the space. 15 seconds. 20. Dawson could not take it. He moved. He threw a low kick. His shin aimed at the outside of Vance's lead leg. It was meant to be the first piece of a combination. Low kick, high kick, cross. 3 parts. He had drilled it 10,000 times. He had ended fights with it. The kick connected. He felt the shin make contact with Vance's lead leg. A solid impact. Muscle-absorbing impact the way muscle absorbs it. For a half second he thought there. That's something. I made contact. I felt that. Vance did not react. Did not flinch. Did not shift his weight. His leg did not move. Dawson was already throwing the high kick. His right leg coming up fast, arcing toward Vance's head. Vance dropped his head. 4 inches. Maybe 5. The kick passed over him with a whisper. And in the half second of that whisper, while Dawson's right foot was still in the air, while all of his weight was on his planted left leg, Vance moved for the first time as the person initiating contact. He stepped in. Close. His shoulder went into Dawson's chest. Not hard, not a collision, but committed. And his left foot hooked behind Dawson's planted ankle and pulled back. The world rotated 90 degrees in just under a quarter of a second. Dawson's back hit the mat with a sound that every person in the gym felt in their own body. The air left his lungs in one short, compressed burst. His shoulder blades contacted the canvas, and his head rocked back, and his arms went out instinctively and found nothing useful. Vance was already on top of him. Not the way a fighter goes on top of another fighter. Not with the scramble and the weight shifting and the looking for position. Vance was simply there in a position Dawson had not seen before, a position that was precise in the way that a piece of machinery is precise, each component doing exactly what it was designed to do. One knee planted just below Dawson's ribs. Not crushing, just present with enough pressure to make full breathing a negotiation rather than an automatic function. The other knee on the inside of Dawson's hip blocking the bridge that would have let him escape. Vance's right forearm laid sideways across Dawson's throat, the bony edge of the wrist resting on the carotid artery with the same deliberate placement as a tool set down on a workbench. Vance's left palm flat on Dawson's forehead. Dawson could not move. He could not bridge. The knee on his hip stopped it before it started. He could not turn. The knee in his solar plexus tracked with any rotation attempt. He could not push the arm from his throat because his head was pinned, and without head movement, he had no leverage. He could not create space because the position had been designed by someone who had thought very carefully about all the ways a man will try to create space to deny all of them. The pressure on his carotid was not enough to make him pass out. It was exactly enough to make it clear with the authority of physics and anatomy that the choice to make it enough was available and was being deliberately withheld. He looked up. Vance's face was directly above his. The gray beard, the pale eyes, the same expression from the bench, the expression from the water bottle, the expression from the tape on the thumb. Calm, present, somewhere past impatience and past aggression and past the need for either. Tap, Vance said. Dawson tapped. Vance did not release immediately. He held the position for one additional second, and in that second, Dawson understood with a clarity that had nothing to do with thought and everything to do with the nerve endings in his throat, that the only reason he was still conscious was because the man above him had decided he should be. Not because Dawson had defended himself. Not because he had escaped. Because Vance Holden had decided. Then Vance released him. He stood up. He stepped back. 7 seconds start to finish. Add the previous 2 exchanges, 15 seconds total. Dawson lay on his back and looked at the ceiling. The lights up there were the industrial kind, long tubes in metal housings, the kind of lights that have no opinion about anything that happens below them. He lay under them and breathed in short, careful pulls because his ribs were complaining and his throat was complaining, and something in the deeper architecture of himself was doing something he did not have a word for. Something that felt like the moment a building starts to settle and the hairline cracks appear in the plaster, invisible to everyone outside but felt in the bones of the structure itself. Around the mat, 23 people stood in the specific silence of a group who have all arrived at the same understanding at the same moment and have not yet decided what to do with it. Nobody was talking, nobody was moving. The bags were still, the mitts were down, the trainers had stopped mid-drill. Even the fighters who had been near the front of the gym too far to see clearly had drifted toward the back because the silence from the back had reached them the way silence reaches people when it has enough weight to travel. Vance reached down. He held out his hand. Dawson looked at it for a moment, 2 moments. Then he reached up and took it. Vance pulled him to his feet with the smooth, unbroken motion of a man lifting something he has lifted before and knows the weight of. Dawson felt the grip. It was not the grip of someone performing strength. It was the grip of a man who has been using his hands for 6 decades and whose hands have become what 60 years of use makes them. They stood facing each other. Vance did not say anything. He did not need to. He nodded once the small forward tip of the head, that means I see you, and this is done, and then he walked off the mat. He went back to his bench. He sat down. He picked up the neoprene brace and began refastening it around his knee with the methodical attention of someone returning to an interrupted task. He pulled his cane out from its lean against the wall, set it across his knees. He picked up the water bottle and took a long drink. He set the bottle down and wiped his beard with the back of his hand. The limp was back. That was the thing that the older fighters in the gym noticed most. The moment Vance's foot touched the floor beyond the mat's edge, the limp returned. The slight favor of the left leg. The careful, measured step, as though the canvas were a different country with different laws and he had just come back through the border. Emmett Gallagher at the hallway entrance put both hands in his pockets and looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up. The gym began to come back to life in pieces. Not all at once. The way a fire comes back after you have thought it has gone out, small catches and holds, in small flickers, until something catches with enough grip to sustain. Dawson was still standing in the middle of the mat. He did not know what to do with his body. His hands were at his sides. His head was down. He was not looking at Vance. He was not looking at anything. He was somewhere inside himself, in a room he had not visited before looking at the walls. Slade Monroe walked up beside him. He put a hand on Dawson's back. Not hard, something gentle. And he said quietly, the kind of quietly that is not meant to be kind, but is not cruel either, just true, come on. Dawson let Slade walk him off the mat. He sat down on the bench 4 feet from Vance. He did not choose it. His body chose it. His body brought him to the closest available surface and sat him down, and he went with it. Emmett pulled a chair over and sat across from both of them. He looked at Dawson for a moment. Then he said, "You know who that is?" Dawson shook his head. "That's Vance Holden." Emmett said it the way you say the name of something that has been sitting right in front of someone and they have not seen it. He did 2 tours as Force Recon. After that, he spent 6 years as the hand-to-hand combat instructor for 2 different recon battalions. He taught at a Marine base down near San Diego from 1979 to 1985. Emmett paused. After that, he left and joined Iron Piston MC and spent the next 41 years not talking about any of it. Dawson was quiet. "He's been coming in here since April," Emmett said. "I told you when you got here. I told you on your first day. Don't mess with him." Dawson looked at Emmett. "You knew." "I knew. You let me go." Emmett took a long breath in through his nose. "You didn't leave me a lot of options, son." He stood up, put the chair back where he had found it. He looked at Vance for a moment, the kind of look that is not a look, but a communication between 2 men who go back far enough to have a private language. Then he went back to the hallway. Slade sat beside Dawson. He did not say anything for a while. The gym noise was reassembling itself. Somebody put the music back on low. A pair of fighters started slow sparring in the nearest cage. The normal sounds of the place were returning, but changed the way a room is changed after something significant happens in it, even after all the furniture is put back. In the locker room ladder, Knox Decker was pulling on a hoodie when Dawson came in. Knox was 26, had been at Desert Iron for 4 years, had a regional title of his own, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your limits and working within them. He and Dawson had trained together twice since Dawson arrived and had gotten along without incident, which in the compact social ecology of a serious gym meant they had a workable respect for each other. Knox looked at Dawson in the mirror. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You doing all right?" "Yeah," Dawson said. He opened his locker and began working the tape off his hands. Knox pulled the hoodie down and turned from the mirror. He leaned against the row of lockers with his arms loose at his sides. "You know what got me," he said, "wasn't the takedowns. I've been taken down 100 times. Wasn't even the control position at the end." He paused. It was that he didn't breathe differently. The whole time, he just didn't breathe any differently. Dawson had not noticed that. He thought about it now. He could not remember hearing Vance breathe. Through the 15 seconds of the exchanges, through the standing and the walking on and off the mat, and the sitting back down on the bench, he had not been able to hear Vance breathe. "How long has he been coming in here?" Dawson asked. "Since spring," Knox said. "April, I think. First time I saw him, I figured he was somebody's grandfather coming in to watch. Then I watched him stretch on the mat for 40 minutes, and I figured out that wasn't what was happening." He picked up his bag. "Emmett told me when I asked. Said Vance used to teach Marines to fight. Not sport, not competition, actual fighting. The kind where the other guy is trying to kill you, and you need to not let him do that." Knox walked to the locker room door. He stopped. "Took guts," he said. "Going back over there after. Took more guts than the sparring." He pushed through the door and was gone. Dawson stood in the empty locker room and finished unwrapping his hands. He thought about what Knox had said. Not the part about guts, the part about breathing. He replayed the 15 seconds the way he replayed his own fights, methodically frame by frame. He tried to find the moments of effort, the moments where a physical action would require a physical response from the body, more oxygen, a harder exchange between the lungs and the blood. He could not find them. He had made 3 attempts. He had driven his full body weight and effort into those attempts. Vance had responded to all 3 of them, and at no point in the responding had there been visible exertion, which meant one of 2 things. Either Vance was operating so far below his ceiling that 15 seconds required nothing from him physically, or the techniques he was using were so efficient that they consumed almost no energy at all. Both possibilities were enormous. Dawson had been told his whole career that his ceiling was exceptional. His cardio, his recovery, his ability to sustain output over 5 rounds, while other fighters began to fade. It was one of the things his head coach had built his game plan around. Higher ceiling outlasts the other man. He understood now that ceiling was not the only variable that mattered. You could have the highest ceiling in the room. That meant nothing if the other man was barely touching his floor. Slade was waiting for him near the front door when Dawson finally emerged. Slade had his jacket on and his keys in his hand. He had been at Desert Iron for 19 years, and he had the kind of face that did not give things away easily. But there was something in the set of his jaw tonight that was different from the usual end-of-session expression. They walked together through the parking lot. The evening air was cool, the Tucson desert shading the temperature down fast after sundown, the way it always did. They walked for a moment without talking. Then the Slade said, "He moved you 3 times in 15 seconds, and none of his strikes landed because he didn't throw any." "I know," Dawson said. "He never threw a punch, never threw a kick that was meant to hurt. He just moved you where he wanted you to be and put you there." "I know." "That's not MMA," Slade said. "That's not wrestling. That's not judo. That's something older than all of that. Something that was put together by people whose only concern was that the man across from them needed to stop being a threat as quickly as possible, with as little energy expended as possible." Dawson stopped at his truck. He stood with his hand on the door handle and looked at the sky. The stars were coming out over the desert, the clean, stark stars of a sky with no competition. "He told me to find somebody my own age," Dawson said, "and I heard him say he was scared." "I know you did," Slade said. "What were you hearing?" Slade was quiet for a moment. "I was hearing a man give you a way out, and I was watching you not take it." He put a hand briefly on the roof of Dawson's truck. "Go home. Sleep. Figure out what you want to do about this, but figure it out honestly." He walked to his own car. Dawson stood there another minute. The stars, the cooling air, the 15 seconds playing through his mind on a loop he could not turn off. He drove home on the back roads rather than the highway. Tucson at night, the mountains to the east showing as dark shapes against the sky still holding some residual light. He had the radio off. He drove in the particular quiet that comes after something significant, the quiet of a man whose internal landscape has been rearranged and who is giving it space to settle. He thought about something one of his old coaches had said to him years ago when he was 17 and had just lost his first amateur bout and was sitting in a parking lot not wanting to go back inside. The coach had said, "The fights you remember are not the ones you win. They're the ones that show you something true about yourself that you didn't know before." He had said it without sentimentality, just as a piece of information, and then he had gone back inside. Dawson had not fully understood it at 17. He parked in front of his building. He sat in the truck for a moment. He thought about the hand on the back of his neck, the 3 small steps, the specific quality of being placed rather than thrown, steered rather than struck. He thought about the absence of anger in Vance's face and the absence of satisfaction, both of which would have been more comfortable than what was there, which was just the calm of a man who was doing something he had been doing for a very long time and was not required to feel anything particular about. He got out of the truck. He went inside. He ate something. He stretched for 20 minutes on the floor of his apartment, going through the routine mechanically while his mind continued its work. At some point, he got up and stood in the center of the room. He set his stance. His fighting stance, the one he had been using for 12 years, the one he had won 18 fights with. He looked at it. He moved a foot, then the other. He rolled his shoulders. He adjusted his chin. He stood there for a while in his apartment in Tucson at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, just standing. He did not know what he was looking for yet, but he knew there was something wrong with the stance that he had not been able to see before today, and he knew that whatever it was, there was a man who could see it, and tomorrow morning he was going to go and do whatever was required to get that man to show him. Vance watched Dawson walk to the heavy bag on the way out. He did not stop working on the knee brace. He watched from the periphery of his attention, the way he watched most things in the gym, present, but not advertising the presence. He watched Dawson put his forehead against the leather of the bag and stand there for about a minute, hands on the bag, forehead on the leather, standing. Then the kid started over. He began with the jab, just the jab, the most basic tool he had. He threw it 40 times and paid attention to every one of them in a way that was visibly different from how he had been throwing it this morning. Not because the jab needed work, because the kid needed to start somewhere. You start with the jab. You start with the thing you know, and you look at it with new eyes and you ask it what it actually is underneath everything you have built on top of it. Vance watched him for a moment. Then he finished with the brace, picked up his cane, and walked out. The next morning, Dawson was there when the doors opened. Vance arrived at 8, as he always did. He came through the door with the cane in his right hand and the gym bag on his left shoulder and the vest already on. He stopped when he saw Dawson. Dawson was sitting on the mat near the back corner, not on the bench, on the mat, legs crossed, no phone in his hand. He had a bottle of water and he had been sitting there for 20 minutes. Vance walked to his bench. He set his bag down, hung his vest on the hook. He sat down and began adjusting the knee brace with the same methodical attention as always. Dawson said, "I'm sorry about yesterday." Vance did not answer right away. He took his time with the brace. He took his time with the Velcro. He took a drink from his bottle. Then he looked at Dawson. "I don't teach," Vance said. "I know," Dawson said. Vance looked at him for a long moment with the pale eyes. Then he said, "Why should I start now?" Dawson had thought about this. He had thought about it in the car, on the way home, and in the dark of his apartment, and for the 20 minutes sitting on the mat before Vance arrived. He had gone through the things he could say. He had considered his record, his upcoming fight, the opportunity, the stakes. He had thrown all of it out. "I don't have a good answer for that," he said. "I just know that I've been in this sport for 12 years, and yesterday was the first time I had no idea what was happening. And I'd like to understand what that was." Vance was quiet for a while. The gym was still early morning sparse. 2 fighters on bikes at the far end. A trainer running footwork with a young kid near the cage. The sounds of the beginning of the day. "3 days a week," Vance said finally. "After your regular training, you bring water and you bring patience. I don't teach the way these gyms teach. We start with how to stand. We don't move on until you can stand right." "How long does standing take?" Dawson asked. Vance looked at him. The closest thing to a half smile crossed the lower part of his face, barely visible under the beard. "Depends on you." Dawson nodded. "All right," he said. He picked up his water bottle. He stood up. He went to begin his regular training. Outside the windows of Desert Iron MM, May Tucson was warming into the morning. The light was the flat, clean light of the desert Southwest in October, hard and honest and without shadow. A pair of Harleys rumbled past on the street heading west, their sound filling the air for a moment and then fading. Dawson did not hear them. He was already working. Vance did not start with strikes. He did not start with grappling, with positioning, with any of the vocabulary that Dawson had spent 12 years learning. He started with standing. 3 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday after Dawson had finished his regular training with Slade and the other fighters after the main session was over and most of the gym had cleared out, Dawson would go to the back mat and Vance would be there, sitting on the bench, water bottle, sometimes the cane, sometimes not, depending on the day and the knee. He would stand up when Dawson arrived. He would walk to the center of the mat, and for the first 2 weeks they did nothing except stand. Vance would adjust Dawson's position, not with instruction at first, with his hands. A touch on the hip to shift weight, a hand on the shoulder to roll it back a quarter inch, 2 fingers on the chin to bring the head to a specific angle, a foot sliding Dawson's left foot 4 inches backward. He would make these adjustments in silence, study the result, make a small sound that was not quite approval, but was acknowledgement, and then do it again. By the end of the first session, Dawson's stance looked almost identical to what it had before. That was the unsettling part. It looked the same, but it felt completely different. He could not have explained the difference to anyone. He could only feel it. Something in the base of his spine. Something in the distribution of his weight through his feet. Something that had to do with the angle of his hips and the relationship between his shoulders and his center of gravity that he had never paid attention to before because nobody had ever asked him to. Vance said very little during these sessions. When he did speak, it was in short declarative sentences that told Dawson what a thing was without explaining why it was that. He seemed to believe or to operate as though he believed that understanding came from doing and not from being told. He had been taught this way. He had taught this way for 6 years when he was doing it professionally. He had not changed the approach. Dawson found it difficult. Not the physical work. The physical work he understood. He was good at physical work. What he found difficult was the patience requirement. He had been training for 12 years. He had a Vegas fight in 9 weeks. He was sitting on a mat adjusting his foot position by fractions of an inch while the clock ran. He did not say this to Vance. He had decided after the morning on the mat and the conversation with Slade in the parking lot that he was going to commit to this the way he committed to everything else. He was going to be quiet and he was going to do the work and he was going to trust that the work was going somewhere. So he stood. He stood and had his position corrected and stood again and had it corrected again. He stood until the corrections stopped coming as often. He stood until the adjustments became smaller. He stood until one evening in the third week when he stepped onto the mat and set his stance without thinking about it, and Vance looked at him for a moment and said, "There," and that was it for that session. They went home. 3 days later, they moved to weight shift. The rest of the gym had quietly taken notice of what was happening on the back mat. None of them said anything about it, at least not where Dawson could hear. But he could feel the change in the air when he and Vance were working. The way conversations near the back would dim slightly. The way a glance would come more often from fighters who were supposed to be focused on their own rounds. Slade watched without comment. He had adjusted Dawson's regular training to complement whatever Vance was teaching, though he had no direct knowledge of Vance's curriculum. He worked from observation. He had spent 19 years developing the ability to see what was happening in a fighter's body and adjust his coaching accordingly. He could see the changes beginning to accumulate in Dawson's stance and movement, small changes, the kind that do not announce themselves, but that a trained eye can find. He did not talk to Vance. He nodded when their paths crossed in the gym. Vance nodded back. That was enough. In the third week of the sessions, Vance began talking more. Not much more, but more than before. He would finish a correction and then stay still for a moment and say something that was not instruction exactly, not guidance, but more like thinking out loud in the presence of another person. The problem with sport fighting, Vance said one morning during a water break, is that it's a sport. The rules keep both men honest. The cage keeps both men in. The rounds keep both men available. So the whole system is set up to produce an answer to the question, which of these two men is better in this context under these rules on this night? He drank. That's a fine question, but it's not the original question. What's the original question? Dawson asked. The original question is, can this man keep functioning when the situation is as bad as it's going to get? He set down the bottle. That's what all of this comes from. Not from sport, from people asking that question very seriously in places where the wrong answer meant you stopped functioning permanently. Dawson turned this over. Can a fighter learn that without being in those places? Vance looked at him. Some of them, the ones who have the right thing already underneath. The sport builds on top of it, and most of the time you never have to dig down to the foundation because the sport is enough, but when the sport gets stripped away, the fight goes to the foundation. And if the foundation isn't there, you find out. He paused. You've got a foundation. I said that at the start. What does it look like, the foundation? Vance thought about this for a longer moment than usual. A man who can be knocked off his story and get back on it, he said finally. Anybody can stay on the story when things are going right. The foundation is whether you get back on it when things go wrong. When you got off the mat the second time on the first day and set your stance and said best of three, he looked at Dawson. That's what I was looking at. Dawson thought about that. He thought about the grin he had worn when he crossed the gym to the bench. The easy confidence that had seemed in retrospect like someone else's confidence, borrowed from a version of himself that had not yet met what was on that mat. I didn't feel like I was demonstrating a foundation, he said. I felt like I was being stupid. Those two things coexist, Vance said, and that was all he said about it. In the fourth week, something changed in the texture of the sessions, not in what Vance was teaching, in the quality of attention Dawson was bringing to it. It happened gradually, without a specific moment he could point to later. He would go to the back mat after his regular session, and he would step onto the canvas, and something in him would settle, the way it did not settle during the regular session. Not relaxation, not ease. A different kind of readiness, more interior, less about what he was preparing to do, and more about what he was prepared to be. He thought about this one evening driving home and tried to name it. He could not name it exactly, but it had something to do with the absence of performance. The regular sessions with Slade were excellent, productive, technically demanding, and Dawson was performing in them, which was right and necessary because performance was what sparring and drilling required. But on the back mat with Vance, there was no performance possible. Vance did not respond to performance. He responded only to what was true in the mechanics and what was not yet true, and the distinction between those two things had nothing to do with how Dawson looked or how much effort he displayed. It was, Dawson thought, the first training environment he had ever been in where trying harder made things worse rather than better. He mentioned this to Vance. Vance had looked at him for a moment. Of course it does, he said. When you try harder, you tighten. When you tighten, you slow down. When you slow down, you are behind. He picked up the water bottle. Speed is what you get when everything else is right. It's not something you add to the other things. It's what happens when the other things are in order. He drank. Most fighters think speed is a resource you generate by working harder. It's not. It's a byproduct you discover by getting out of the way. Dawson had sat with that for the rest of the evening. 4 weeks in the thing with Gunnar Cross happened. In those 4 weeks, the gym had developed its own understanding of what was happening on the back mat. Nobody had announced it. Nobody had made a speech. It had arrived the way most true things arrive in a gym, through observation, through the gradual accumulation of evidence that something real was taking place in a specific corner. Reed Carver mentioned it to Knox in the locker room one afternoon. He said he had been watching Dawson's footwork and sparring and that something had changed. He said it the way you say something like that when you are not entirely sure you have the vocabulary for what you are observing. Knox had said, yeah, I've been seeing it too. The way he resets. Something in how he resets. Slade had said nothing publicly. But twice in the 4th week, he had stopped a sparring round mid-exchange to correct something, and both times the correction was a single word or phrase, and both times Dawson had made the adjustment, and Slade had watched the adjusted result and said there. Just that. There. And moved on. Emmett watched from behind his desk and said nothing at all. And in the watching, you could see the specific satisfaction of a man who has managed a space for 22 years and has learned to recognize when something true is happening inside it. Gunnar Cross was the man Dawson was fighting in Vegas. He was 31 years old, originally from Nevada, with a record of 22 wins and 3 losses, in a style built around pressure clinch work in a right hand that had ended 11 fights by knockout. He had been ranked in the national top 10 for 2.5 years. He was good enough that the fight had generated actual interest outside the regional circuit. Ticket sales were strong. The organization had promoted it to their B-tier platform, which was real exposure. Gunnar Cross was also, by reputation and by observable fact, someone who operated in the space between gamesmanship and genuine ugliness. He talked loudly. He used social media as a weapon. He had been fined twice for actions in the clinch that the judges had missed and the commission had not. His management ran an aggressive psychological pressure campaign against opponents in the weeks before fights looking for cracks. They had found something they thought was a crack with Dawson. The clip appeared on the Thursday evening. Dawson saw it on his phone at 10 o'clock, an hour before he would normally have gone to sleep. Someone from Gunnar's camp had filmed through the windows of Desert Iron during a Tuesday session. The angle was bad, partially obstructed, but you could see the back mat, and you could see 2 figures there, one young and one old, and you could see the older one adjusting the younger one's foot position with small, careful corrections. The caption read, "This is what Briggs has been doing to prepare for Cross. Learning from Grandpa at the retirement home gym. We're not worried." It had 32,000 views when Dawson first saw it. By morning, it had 90. By midday Friday, it had cleared 200,000 and climbing. The comments were what they always are. Dawson had been on the internet long enough to know that comments were not reality. He also knew that the fight promotion industry operated in a space where perception was close enough to reality to matter. If enough people decided a fighter was a joke, the fight lost value. If the fight lost value, the organization made different decisions about future opportunities. His phone rang at noon. It was his manager. "You seeing this?" "I'm seeing it. We need to talk about optics." The guys at the organization have been calling. They're not pulling the fight, but they're asking questions about your preparation and whether you've got the right support team in place. "The right support team," Dawson repeated. "They want to know if you're taking this seriously." Dawson stood in his apartment with the phone to his ear and looked out the window at the street. It was a hot October afternoon in Tucson, and the street was empty in the way that streets in Tucson are empty in the afternoon, all the sane people indoors. "I'm taking it seriously," he said. "Then maybe show them that. Maybe we make some adjustments that make the story look different." Dawson understood what adjustments meant. It meant bringing in someone with a national profile to serve as lead trainer for the Vegas camp. It meant press photos. It meant posting the right sessions. It meant managing the narrative. It did not mean old man on a back mat adjusting foot position. "I'll think about it," Dawson said and ended the call. He went to Desert Iron for his regular session. He went through the session with Slade. He did his work with the particular focused attention that comes when a man is proving something to himself rather than to anyone watching. He sparred 2 rounds with Reed Carver and worked the mitts with a junior trainer and ran the footwork patterns that Slade had laid out for the week. All of it was good. All of it was the kind of good that his body had been built to do over 12 years of training and competition. He was a professional, and the professionalism was real, and it showed in every movement. And yet when he was doing it, part of him kept going back to the back mat. Part of him kept looking at the bench in the corner and thinking about the specific weight of what was sitting there. Not the man exactly, but what the man represented, the door that had been open, and the question of whether it was still open. He thought about Pearl Weaver's hands flat on the table, the specificity of what she had said, what you walked away from this week. He went through the session with Slade. He did his work. When the regular session was over and it was time for the back mat, he walked past the bench where Vance was sitting. Vance looked up. Dawson kept walking, past the mat, to the front door. He picked up his bag and left. He told himself it was just for the night. He drove home with his radio on something up-tempo that he did not hear. He ate dinner without tasting it. He sat with the phone and looked at the clip again because apparently he had not learned anything from watching it the first 3 times. 240,000 views by midnight. The comments had the shape that comments on this kind of thing always have. The people who were genuinely interested in the fight game and who had real things to say about preparation methods and training philosophy. The people who were not interested in the fight game and who were interested only in the performance of mockery. The people somewhere in between who were putting in their time on both sides of the argument without much investment in the outcome. He put the phone down. He sat in the kitchen. He thought about something Vance had said in the second week of their sessions. They had been going through a weight shift drill, something slow and deliberate, and Dawson had made a mistake and corrected it immediately, and Vance had watched the correction and said, without drama, most of the mistakes men make are not about the technique. They are about the moment before the technique. They are about what they decided the situation was before the situation showed them what it actually was. He had not understood it entirely at the time. He understood it now. He had decided what the clip meant before it showed him what it actually was. He told himself he needed to think. By the 3rd day, he had managed to construct a fairly convincing internal argument that what he was doing with Vance was supplementary at best and a distraction at worst, and that with the Vegas fight 8 weeks out, he needed to be running his camp the way a serious professional runs a camp. He did not go to the back mat for 4 days. On the 5th day, a woman walked into Desert Iron that nobody had seen before. She was around 40, though she carried herself in the specific way of someone who has done hard physical work and has a comfort in their body that comes from that. She was tall, medium build, brown hair, pulled back, wearing scrubs under an open flannel. She had the easy authority of someone who spends her professional life in situations that require calm under pressure. She asked for Dawson Briggs at the front desk. Emmett was behind the desk. He looked at her for a moment. I can tell him you're here. Who are you? Pearl Weaver, she said. I'm Vance Holden's daughter. Emmett looked at her for one more moment. Then he called Dawson. Dawson came from the locker room. He had just finished his morning session. He was still in his workout clothes towel over one shoulder. He looked at Pearl. She looked at him. You don't know me, she said. My father doesn't know I'm here. He would not appreciate it if he did, so I'm going to ask you to keep this between us. She paused. Can we sit somewhere? They sat at the table near the front window. The gym noise was low at this hour. Emmett had found something that required his complete attention at the back of his desk. Pearl put her hands flat on the table. She had the hands of someone who works with their hands strong and clean and competent. She looked at Dawson directly in the way of a person who has decided to be honest and is not going to back off from it. My father was diagnosed with prostate cancer 14 months ago, she said. Stage 2, he's been in treatment. The prognosis is good odds with what they're doing, but he has good weeks, and the bad weeks are harder than he lets on. Dawson held still. He doesn't talk about it, Pearl said. He doesn't talk about almost anything that matters to him. That is a characteristic of my father that I have spent 40 years learning to work with. She paused. But he talks about you. Me. He came home after the first session, the one where he sparred you, and he said, and I am quoting this as accurately as I can because it was notable enough that I wrote it down, there's a kid at the gym who has the right engine. He just doesn't know what car he's supposed to be driving. She looked at Dawson. That's a compliment. From my father, that is a significant compliment. Dawson said nothing. He agreed to teach you, Pearl said. I don't know what you two have been doing in there, but I know that my father has been getting up before 6 on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings for the last month, and going to that gym and coming home in better spirits than he has had since before the diagnosis. The thing about my father is that he has been the person everyone else leaned on his entire life. Marines Club family. He does not lean. She stopped. Teaching you has given him something to push against, something forward, at a time when a lot of what he is dealing with is about things ending. The gym was quiet enough that Dawson could hear the traffic on the street outside. I'm not telling you this so you feel sorry for him, Pearl said. He would hate that more than anything. I'm telling you so you understand what you walked away from this week. She stood up. Whatever you decide, it's your decision. Your fight, your career, your life. She picked up her bag. But I want you to know what was on that back mat, and I want you to know what it cost him to offer it. She left. Dawson sat at the table for a long time. Emmett materialized at the other side of the table after a few minutes with 2 cups of coffee, which he set down without comment and then went away again. Dawson drank the coffee without tasting it and looked at the window and thought about a man who had taught Marines to survive things that should not be survivable and who was currently fighting something that could not be punched or outmaneuvered, and who had decided in the middle of that to spend his Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday mornings on a back mat with a 28-year-old welterweight who had pointed at him across a gym. He thought about the clip on Gunnar Cross's feed. He thought about what he had told his manager. I'll think about it. He had thought about it. He drove home. He sat in his apartment. He called his manager back. About what you said yesterday, he started. Good, his manager said. I've already reached out to a couple of coaches who... I'm not changing anything, Dawson said. Silence. Gunnar Cross wants me to change something. That's why he posted the clip. He wants me to react. He wants me to make a decision based on what looks good instead of what is good. He paused. I'm not going to do that. His manager was quiet for a moment. This is a big fight, Dawson. I know what kind of fight it is. Another pause. All right, your call. He hung up. He got up and drove back to Desert Iron. It was early evening. The afternoon session was in progress. The gym was full. He walked through to the back corner. Vance was on the bench, water bottle in hand. He looked up when Dawson approached. Dawson said, I'm sorry about this week. Vance looked at him. I let something get in my head that shouldn't have gotten in my head. It's out now. He paused. If the offer still stands, I'd like to continue. Vance did not answer immediately. He took a drink from his bottle. He looked at Dawson the way he had looked at him on the mat, the same quality of looking patient and without agenda. Offer doesn't stand, Vance said. Dawson blinked. You walked, Vance said. Not unkindly, not harshly. I don't teach people who walk. That's not judgment. That's just how I've always done it. If a man walks in the middle of learning, the learning is finished. Dawson stood there. I understand, he said. That's fair. He started to turn. I said the offer doesn't stand, Vance said. I didn't say anything else. Dawson turned back. Vance was looking at his water bottle. Something in the set of his jaw suggested that the sentence was not yet complete, though he was taking his time getting to the rest of it. He took another drink. He set the bottle down. Come back Thursday, he said, 5 in the morning before the gym opens. Emmett will leave the door unlocked. He paused. And don't be late. He picked up his cane. He stood up. He walked toward the exit without looking back. Tuesday, he did not sleep well. Wednesday, he slept worse. He had, in the 48 hours after returning to Desert Iron and being told the offer was gone through several distinct phases of feeling about the situation. The first phase was relief, which surprised him. He had expected to feel shame or defensiveness, but the first thing he had felt was relief, the way you feel when you have been trying to maintain a position that was costing you more than you realized, and you are finally released from the maintenance of it. He had walked away because he was scared of how something looked. He knew that now. The knowledge was uncomfortable, but it was also clean, the way a difficult truth is always cleaner than a comfortable lie. The second phase was anger, not at Vance at himself, the specific anger of a man who has identified his own weakness in a situation that did not require weakness, and who cannot go back and fix the identification because the identification happened after the fact. He had been afraid of a clip online. He had been afraid of his manager's tone on the phone. He had let those fears run a decision that should have had nothing to do with them. The third phase was something harder to name. It had to do with Pearl at the table and what she had told him about the blood work and the diagnosis and the treatment schedule and the bad weeks that were harder than Vance let on. He had spent a day and a half trying to figure out what to do with that information. He did not want to feel sorry for Vance. Pearl had been explicit about that, and she had been right about it, and he agreed with her that Vance would hate it. But he also could not unknow what he now knew, could not ununderstand the specific weight of what had been offered to him by a man dealing with what that man was dealing with on the 3 mornings a week that could have been spent on any number of other things. He had settled eventually into a kind of resolve, not dramatic, not performed, the quiet resolve that comes after you have looked at yourself clearly and made a decision about what you are going to do about what you saw. Thursday morning, 4:45, he was in the parking lot of Desert Iron in the dark. The door was unlocked, as Vance had said. The gym was dark except for the industrial lights above the back mat, which someone had left on. Dawson set his bag by the bench and stood on the mat and waited. At 5, exactly 5 headlights swept across the front window and the sound of a motorcycle engine cut out in the parking lot. Vance came through the door, or so there were 2 minutes later. He walked to the back mat without turning on any other lights. He looked at Dawson. Dawson was standing in his stance, the stance Vance had spent 2 weeks correcting. Vance looked at it for a long moment. "Weight's too far forward," he said. Dawson adjusted. "There," Vance said. That was all. They began. Tuesday, he did not sleep well. Wednesday, he slept worse. He lay in the dark of his apartment, thinking about the fight and about Pearl Weaver at the table, and about a man getting up before 6 3 mornings a week to offer something that he had never offered anyone in 41 years of keeping a door closed. Thursday, he was at Desert Iron at 4:45 in the morning. Inside, only the industrial lights above the back mat were burning, left on by whoever had arrived before him. Jacket over the vest, the cane, the gym bag. He looked at Dawson. Dawson was standing in his stance. Vance looked at it for a long moment. "Weight's too far forward," he said. Dawson adjusted. "There," Vance said. That was all. They began. The next 6 weeks were different from the first 4. Vance began teaching combinations. Not striking combinations, not in the way Dawson understood combinations. Movement combinations. Sequences of position and angle and weight transfer that produced outcomes. Takedowns, controls, separations, without requiring the inputs of strength or speed that those outcomes normally required. He taught them in pieces, and each piece had to be correct before the next one was added, and correct meant something more precise than Dawson had encountered before. It meant the mechanics were right at a level below conscious control, below the kind of right that requires you to think about it. Dawson made mistakes. He made the same mistakes multiple times. Vance was not impatient about the repetition, but he was exact about the standard, and the standard did not move. The thing was correct, or it was not, and if it was not, they did it again. In the 5th week, Vance introduced resistance. Not hard resistance. He would place a hand, a forearm, a shoulder in Dawson's path, and let Dawson work against the obstacle. The obstacle was consistent, and the obstacle was honest, and it told Dawson things about his mechanics that open-air drilling could not tell him. Where he was generating force correctly, and where he was compensating with effort for something that should have been structure. Dawson found that he was compensating in more places than he had realized. He worked on not compensating. Outside the back mat, his regular training continued. He sparred 3 times a week. He did conditioning 6 days a week. He worked with Slade on the specific defensive adjustments needed for Gunnar Cross's right hand and his clinch game. He watched tape for 2 hours every other evening. He ran his camp the way a professional runs a camp in the 8 weeks before a major fight. But the 3 mornings on the back mat with Vance were the part of the day he thought about most. It was not the techniques exactly. It was something the techniques were pointing toward. Something about the relationship between stillness and force. Something about the difference between reacting and being ready. Something about how a body that is organized correctly does not need to hurry because it is already in the right place. He thought about this one morning in the 5th week of the revised sessions during a rest break, sitting on the mat while Vance sat on the bench. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Vance looked up. "What is this? What do you call it? What system is this?" Vance considered for a moment. "Doesn't have a name I use," he said. "Pieces of things that work, things I was taught, things I figured out." He paused. The name would matter to someone who needed to sell it. I was never selling it. How long did it take you to put it together? Vance was quiet. I put it together the first time in about 45 seconds, he said. On a hillside when I was 22. He picked up the water bottle. The rest of the years were just understanding what I'd done. Dawson did not ask about the hillside. He understood that the door was closed and that the closed door was not an invitation. In the 6th week, Emmett stayed late one evening after the gym closed and sat with Vance while Dawson finished cooling down. The three of them sat on the benches in the back corner, the lights dimmed to the overnight setting the gym quiet and large around them. Emmett looked at Dawson. You know what the last person was that Vance trained one-on-one? Dawson did not. Neither do I, Emmett said. I asked him. He said it was classified. He smiled just a little. I think that was a joke. But with Vance, you can never entirely tell. Vance said nothing. He was working on the knee brace. 41 years in iron piston, Emmett said to no one in particular. Not a lot of guys in that life end up sitting on a back mat teaching a welterweight how to stand. I want you to think about what that means. Dawson looked at Vance. Why, he said. Not in a bad way, I just mean why me? Why start now? Vance finished with the brace. He sat with the cane across his knees. He was quiet for a moment. I watched you for 2 weeks before you came over to the bench, he said. Before you pointed across the gym. I watched you train, the way you hit the bag, the way you move, the way you breathe at the end of a hard round. He paused. There is a particular quality in certain fighters. It's not the talent. You can see the talent in 100 fighters. It's something underneath the talent, a kind of seriousness about the whole enterprise. Like the fighting matters to them, not just as a thing they're good at, but as a thing they are. He looked at Dawson. You have that. You had it even when you were walking across the gym being an idiot. Dawson almost smiled. And I'm 68 years old, Vance said simply. The window for doing this kind of thing doesn't stay open forever. At some point, you look at what you know and you think about whether anyone else should know it before you're gone. And either there's someone sitting in the gym who has the right foundation or there isn't. He stood up. You were sitting in the gym. He walked out. Emmett sat for a moment after the door closed. Then he looked at Dawson. Go home, he said. Sleep. You've got a week and a half. Do your work and then get on the plane and go do what you do. Dawson nodded. He stood. He picked up his bag. At the door, he stopped. Emmett, does Vance know you told me about him the first day? Force Recon, all of it. Emmett looked at him. He knows I know things. He knows I sometimes say things. He paused. He's never asked me to keep anything secret. He's just never volunteered it. That's a different thing. Dawson nodded. He pushed through the door into the night air of Tucson. 2 weeks out from the Vegas fight, Knox Decker was running a hard sparring round in Cage 2 on a Wednesday afternoon. His partner threw a combination that caught Knox at an angle. Knox went back into the fence and the fence buckled wrong, and he came down awkward on his left arm. The sound was not a good sound. The whole gym heard it. It was a fracture. A clean fracture of the radius 6 weeks minimum, and Knox's next fight, which had been scheduled for December, was postponed. Dawson had ridden to the hospital in Emmett's truck. They sat in the ER waiting room. Knox came out with his arm in a brace, in the specific expression of a man who has done the math on 6 weeks and has not found a number he likes. He sat down next to Dawson. December's out, he said. I know, I'm sorry. Knox stretched his legs out, leaned his head back. The stuff you've been doing with Vance in the morning, he said. I've been watching when I can. You look different. Not dramatically different. Just like something settled. Is that not right? Dawson asked. That's exactly right, Knox said. Emmett drove them back to the gym. They rode mostly in silence. Tucson in the evening, the streets lit orange from the streetlights. In the last week before Vegas, Dawson had his final session on the back mat with Vance. They worked for 90 minutes longer than usual. At the end, they sat on opposite ends of the mat, both catching their breath, the gym around them, winding down from the late afternoon session. Vance said, Tell me what you're thinking about when you think about cross. Dawson had been thinking about this question. The right hand, he said. He loads it. There's a pattern. His left shoulder drops about 4 degrees before he throws it. It's subtle, but it's there. Vance nodded. And the clinch. He's strong there. Stronger than his record suggests because he uses it for setup, not for the win. He drags guys into the clinch to tire them and then lets them out and hits them when they're trying to reset. And Dawson thought about the rest of what he had been thinking about Cross. He's never been hurt, he said finally. Not really. In 25 fights, he's been dropped once and he got up immediately and won the round. He's never been in a position where he had to question himself. He doesn't know what that's like. Vance looked at him. And you do. I do now. There was a silence. Last week of camp, Vance said. Rest Wednesday. Don't watch any more tape. You know what you know. He paused. The tape is for understanding the man. At some point, you have to stop understanding him and just fight him. Dawson nodded. You know what I've never told a fighter before a fight, Vance said. No. Good luck. He looked at Dawson. Not because I don't wish it, because luck is the wrong word. Luck is what you wish for when you don't have what you need. You have what you need. He stood up. You're going to fight a good fighter, and it's going to be hard, and at some point in there, it's going to be harder than you expected. When that happens, you're going to feel something. He paused. Don't analyze it. Don't label it. Let your body do what your body knows. He walked off the mat. Vance, Dawson said. Vance turned. Dawson did not have a speech. He said what he had. I didn't come here to find a teacher. I came here to break bags and get ready for a fight. And I ended up, he stopped. I just want you to know that what happened on that mat and what happened after it matters. It's going to matter after this fight too, for a long time. Vance looked at him. I know, he said, not flatly, not dismissively, with the quality of a man who is allowing something to be true. Get some sleep. He walked out. Dawson stood on the empty mat for a moment. He looked up at the lights, the industrial lights in their metal housings, perfectly indifferent, perfectly present. Then he got his bag and went home to pack for Vegas. The night before he flew, his phone rang at 2 a.m. He was not asleep. He had been lying in the dark of his apartment, trying to be asleep and not succeeding. His mind was doing the thing it did before major fights, running the tape, not of his opponent, just the general tape of his career, from the backyard at 12 to the regional titles to the gym and the bench and the man on it. He looked at the phone, the initials Vance listed himself under when he put his number in Dawson's phone on the second week of the sessions. He answered. You awake? Vance said. It was not a question. Yeah, figured. A pause. Dawson could hear the background of wherever Vance was. Wind, maybe a porch. I'm going to tell you something. I wasn't going to, but I decided you should hear it before tomorrow. Dawson sat up. He put his feet on the floor. He was quiet. 1971, Vance said. Second tour. We were 4 days into a recon mission, way in the kind of distance that means if something goes wrong, you solve it yourself because there's nobody coming. We walked into something we shouldn't have. Contact from 3 sides. Fast and overwhelming. A pause. 5-man team. Inside of 90 seconds, I was the last one standing. Dawson did not move. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark and listened. I was 22 years old, Vance said. I was scared in a way I have never been scared before or since. Not because I thought I was going to die, though I did think that. Because I was alone in a way I had never been alone, and everything I had been trained to do assumed I was not alone. The training had other people in it. This had just me. He stopped, the wind in the background. I had a decision to make, Vance said. I could move toward the most immediate threat, which meant going forward, which was the most dangerous direction, or I could move away from it, which was less dangerous in the next 60 seconds, and significantly more dangerous in the next 60 minutes because the terrain behind me had no options. He paused. I went forward. Dawson sat with that. I couldn't tell you how I did what I did next, Vance said. I have thought about it for 53 years. I have analyzed it the way you analyze things when you're a trainer, and analyzing is your job. I cannot reconstruct it in the way you reconstruct a technique. All I can tell you is that my body did something my brain did not direct, something that my body had been trained to do, and that my brain in that moment was not fast enough or clear enough to supervise. And it worked. Another pause. I walked out. Dawson said, I'm sorry about your team. Vance was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, me too. Then, I'm telling you this because tomorrow night at some point in that fight, you're going to find yourself somewhere you didn't plan to be. Gunnar Cross is good, and he is going to do things you didn't anticipate, even though you've watched him 100 times. That's what real fights do. They take your plan and they fold it in half. Dawson nodded even though Vance couldn't see him. When that happens, Vance said, your brain is going to start talking. It's going to start running scenarios and options and what ifs, and most of what it tells you is going to be noise. He paused. Let the body work. The body knows what it knows. We've spent 2 months making it know something. Trust that. Dawson said, how do you know when to trust the body and when to listen to the brain? Vance considered. When the brain is being helpful, he said, it asks questions. What do I see? Where is he? Where am I? Those are good questions. When the brain is being noise, it makes statements. I can't do this. This is going wrong. I'm losing. He paused. Well, learn the difference. Questions are your friend. Statements are your enemy. Dawson sat with that in the dark. Get some sleep, Vance said, and the line went quiet. Dawson sat in the dark for a little while longer. He thought about a 22-year-old man alone on a hillside who had gone forward when every surviving instinct said, go back. He thought about questions and statements. He fell asleep somewhere after 3. When he woke up, the sun was coming through the window, and he had 4 hours before his flight, and the fight was less than 48 hours away, and he felt for the first time in the week since Desert Iron like he was ready. Not confident in the hollow performance way he had been confident before. Ready in a different way. The way a thing is ready when it has been prepared at the level below thought, at the level where the preparation is no longer something you remember doing, but something your body has already become. He packed his bag. He had a cup of coffee. He called Slade. Ready, Slade said. Yeah, Dawson said. Slade could hear something in the word. He had known Dawson for 2 years. He had heard Dawson say he was ready before every training camp and before every fight. This was different, and he knew it was different, and he did not ask about the difference because some things should be left alone. Good, Slade said. See you at the airport. Vegas was a specific kind of loud that Vegas always is, and Dawson moved through it without fully seeing it. He had been to the city 3 times before, twice for fights, and once for a trade show that his manager had dragged him to for reasons that had not panned out. He knew the airport, the particular quality of the recycled air, the casino floors between the arrivals terminal and the cab stand, the way the light inside was permanent and artificial and determined to convince you that time did not exist here the way it existed elsewhere. He took a car to the hotel. Slade was on the same flight across the aisle. They did not talk much on the plane. They had been in camp together long enough that the silence between them was a working one. At the hotel, Dawson went to his room and unpacked with the methodical order of a man who has done this many times and has a system for it. Shoes here, clothes here, training gear accessible, not buried, supplement bag on the counter, notebook on the nightstand. He lay on the bed with the lights off and looked at the ceiling. The fight was tomorrow night, 28 hours. He had received one text during the day from the initials on his phone. It came at 2 in the afternoon, a single sentence. The body knows what it knows. Let it work. Dawson had read it 3 times. Then he put the phone face down on the nightstand and did not pick it up again until after the fight. He went through what Slade had given him for the last few days. Light movement in the morning, afternoon rest, pre-fight meal at 6. Weigh-in was already done yesterday morning, and he had come in clean at 170 without any drama. He had eaten and rehydrated, and his body felt close to right. He thought about Gunner Cross. He thought about the right hand and the left shoulder drop that preceded it. He thought about the clinch work and the dragon release pattern and the 22 fights worth of tape he had studied. He thought about what Vance had said about tape. Stop analyzing him and just fight him. He fell asleep before he meant to and woke up 3 hours later in the dark. The hotel room still dark. Vegas outside the window doing what Vegas does. He lay still for a moment. Then he got up and drank water and sat by the window and looked at the lights below. He thought about the back mat. He thought about standing. He thought about a 22-year-old man on a hillside in 1971 who had 4 choices and chose the hardest one and walked out. He went back to sleep. The morning of the fight, he did something he had not planned to do. He called Pearl Weaver, not Vance, Pearl. He did not entirely know why he called her rather than her father. He knew her number because she had given it to him the day she came to the gym, a small rectangle of business card R, and printed under her name, a phone number, a hospital name. He had put it in his phone and thought he would never use it. He used it at 7:30 in the morning on fight day. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding already awake and already in motion. The background of the call full of the sounds of a morning that had started earlier than his. Dawson Briggs, she said, not a question. She had his number too. I just wanted to say thank you, he said, For what you told me in the gym about your father. He paused. If you hadn't come in that day, I might not have gone back. Pearl was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he's going to be watching tonight. I know. Don't do it for that. Don't do it for him or for me or for anybody. Do it for what it is. I know, Dawson said. Another pause. He told me last night, Pearl said, that you have a good foundation. She paused again, and he could hear the slight catch in her voice that someone who was not listening for it would miss. He doesn't say that about many things, or many people. Dawson held the phone. I know, he said. Good luck tonight, she said, and ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment, the Vegas hotel room around him, the sounds of the city beginning to build outside. Then he put the phone down and began his fight day. Fight day was the particular kind of slow that fight days always are when you have spent the week building toward them. The hours accumulated. He moved through them. Morning movement, a light jog, shadow work, food, rest. Slade arriving at 4 to start the pre-fight routine, the hand wraps, the pad work, the loosening, the specific choreography of getting a body ready to perform at high intensity in a controlled environment. In the dressing room an hour out, Slade sat beside him on the bench while the cutmen worked on his hands. How are you feeling? Slade asked. Dawson thought about it honestly. Quiet, he said. Slade looked at him. Quiet. Not flat, not calm exactly, just quiet. Slade nodded slowly. He had been a trainer for 19 years. He had heard fighters describe their pre-fight states in many ways. Quiet was not a word he heard often. He held it for a moment, thinking about what it meant. That's good, he said. That's a good word. One of the organizational representatives came through at some point to go through the standard pre-fight protocol. Glove check, mouthguard check. The rules run down that no one needs because everyone knows the rules, but that everyone goes through anyway because the protocol exists for a reason. The representative looked at Dawson and said, "You good?" Dawson said, "Yeah." The representative had been doing this for 11 years. He had seen every version of pre-fight demeanor that existed. He had seen fighters who were visibly scared and fighters who were performing not scared and fighters who were genuinely calm in the way that very good fighters sometimes are. He looked at Dawson and filed something away and went to check the other dressing room. Slade put the last wraps on Dawson's hands and taped them and looked at the result and nodded. He sat on the bench across from Dawson. Talk me through the game plan one more time, Slade said. Dawson looked at him. Don't run, he said. Move laterally. Make him load the right by giving him angles he wants. When he loads, go outside. Don't fight him in the clinch unless I've neutralized his posting arm first. Rounds 1 and 2 are investment rounds. By 3, I know the map. Slade nodded. And if he catches you early, get back on my stance. Don't rush. The body knows what it knows. Slade looked at the phrase. He had not heard it before. But something in Dawson's face when he said it, the specific quality of conviction that was not performance and not bravado, told him that it belonged to someone else and that it was real and that he should leave it alone. All right, Slade said. They sat in the dressing room for a while and listened to the sound of the arena building. The walk to the cage was the specific tunnel of noise that arena fights generate. The crowd sound rising and building, and the lights and the booming and the coordinated chaos of a production that has been organized to look like barely controlled energy. Dawson moved through it. He could hear it. He was not inside it. He was somewhere behind his own eyes in a place that was very still. Gunnar Cross came in from the other side of the arena. He was taller than Dawson, longer in the reach, with the physique of a man who had been building himself for this kind of fight for his entire adult life. He had his team around him, 4 of them, and they were performing the kind of focused intensity that teams perform before big fights, part genuine preparation and part theater. Cross caught Dawson's eye across the cage as they were receiving final instructions from the referee. He looked at Dawson the way a man looks at a thing he has already decided about. Dawson looked back. There was a moment, not hostile, not theatrical, just 2 men looking at each other the way men look at each other when they are about to find out something they do not yet know. The bell rang. Cross moved first. He moved forward, which was his way, and he brought pressure, which was his tool. He was throwing shots to the body in the first 30 seconds. Light shots, not full commitment, the kind of shots designed to get a feel for how you respond and where your hands go when you defend. He was finding the map. Dawson let him find it. He moved not away exactly laterally, and he used the angles that Vance had spent the 5th and 6th weeks drilling into him, the angles that created exposure in Cross's guard, while absorbing the body shots on the forearms rather than the ribs. He felt Cross adjusting. Cross was good. He registered the angles and adjusted, and the adjustments were fast and smart. But they were adjustments. He was reacting. Dawson kept moving. The first round was Cross's on points, but not comfortably his and not in the way he wanted it to be. Cross was good enough to feel the difference in Dawson from the opening exchange. He had fought 18 men in the past 4 years, and he had a well-developed sense for how opponents respond to his opening pressure. Most fighters do one of 3 things in the first minute. They back up, they counterpunch, or they try to clinch. These are the options that pressure produces, and Cross had built his game plan for this fight around which of these 3 options Dawson was most likely to choose. Dawson did not choose any of them. He moved laterally, and he used angles that Cross did not recognize, and the angles created problems that Cross had to solve in real time without a frame of reference for solving them. He solved them because he was good and because he had been in difficult exchanges before, but he solved them from behind, always slightly reacting, always slightly late. Between the 3rd and 4th minutes of the round, Cross loaded the right hand twice. The shoulder drop was there exactly as the tape had said it would be. The first time Dawson was out of range and the punch landed on air. The second time Cross adjusted the distance and the punch connected a glancing shot off the top of Dawson's shoulder that spun him and put him briefly on the back foot. Cross followed it. He was right to follow it. That was what you did when a punch landed and the other man was turned. Dawson reset. Not the panic reset of a man who has been hurt and is covering. A different kind. A deliberate return to the place where he needed to be, the weight distribution, the angle, the position Vance had spent 2 months adjusting. Cross saw the reset and did not understand it. He had put men on the back foot before, and the back foot led to the ropes or the fence and then to the finish. This did not follow the pattern. He backed off. He recalibrated. He took the round on points because he had landed the better shots and had dictated more of the space, and the 3 ringside judges credited him accordingly. The first round was Cross's on points. Dawson knew it and did not fight the knowledge. He was investing in the map. He was learning what Cross looked like in real time rather than on tape. Tape was information. This was something else. This was the man in front of him, reacting to him specifically to his style and his movement and his response patterns, and that data was worth a round. Between rounds, Slade said 2 things. He said where Cross's weight is between his feet, when he loads the right, and he said the drop comes first. Both things Dawson already knew. He nodded. Slade put the water bottle to his mouth, and he drank, and the stool came out from under him, and the bell rang. Before the bell, Slade had leaned in close. His cardio drops in round 2, he said. Not dramatically, but it drops. He'll load heavier. The shoulder tell will be more pronounced. Dawson nodded. He had seen this in the tape. 25 fights of data said Gunnar Cross was a better round 1 fighter than a round 2 fighter, that the pressure he brought in the first 3 minutes was the sharpest version of the pressure, and that it softened from there imperceptibly if you were not looking clearly. If you were, Dawson was looking. Cross came out with more commitment. He had taken the first round and he wanted to build on it. He came out throwing body, then head, the combination that had accounted for 3 of his knockout wins, and he loaded the right hand as the capping piece because the right hand was his best weapon, and in round 2 he was starting to trust his belief that Dawson had not figured out how to handle it. He was wrong about that. Cross loaded the right hand the way the tape said he loaded it, and the way the first round had confirmed he loaded it. Left shoulder drop, weight shift, the tell that was subtle enough to miss at normal speed and visible enough to act on if you were looking for it. Dawson was looking for it. He let the right hand come. He moved his head outside the line of it. In the same motion, without thought, without planning something that had been drilled on a back mat on Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday mornings for 10 weeks happened. His left hand found Cross's right wrist. Not a grip, not a clench. The laying of a hand. The calm of someone who knows what the railing is for. He pulled, just slightly. He felt Cross's front foot come forward when it should not have. He felt Cross's shoulder roll. He felt the balance go. What came next was not planned. It was not retrieved from memory. It was simply what his body did with the position it found itself in, because his body had been in this position enough times that it knew. The hip, the shoulder, the turn, the specific coordination of weight and angle that Vance had shown him and corrected and shown him again until it stopped being something he was doing and became something his body simply was. Cross went down. Not the way Dawson had gone down that first morning. Not the controlled placement. Not the steered descent. Cross went down hard, his shoulder hitting the canvas, his momentum carrying him into a roll that he tried to control and could not. Dawson was already there. He was in a position that was not from MMA, not from wrestling, not from any system that the commentators or the crowd had a name for, but that worked. That worked exactly as well as things work when they have been tested in real conditions by people who needed them to work and could not afford for them not to. The knee in the solar plexus, the arm across the throat, the palm on the forehead. Not all of it, not exactly that adapted the way all real things are adapted from their origins to fit the specific moment. Cross tried to bridge. He could not bridge. Cross tried to turn. He could not turn effectively. He was a very good fighter who had been put in a position that his training had not prepared him for because his training had prepared him for fights. And this was something that was adjacent to a fight and older than a fight and quieter than a fight. The referee was there, watching, waiting, doing his job. Cross tapped, not in the resigned way of a man who has lost control of a submission and needs to protect his arm or his neck. In the sudden sharp way of a man who has been told by his body that this is not a position from which he is going to escape and whose body is right. The bell, the referee in between them, the crowd sound that rose from wherever it had been and filled the arena completely. Dawson stood up. His corner was coming through the gate. Slade first with his arms out and his face doing something that 19 years of professional restraint was not quite managing to contain. Behind him, the other corner, men and then the organizational people, and then the announcer finding his way to the cage. Dawson stood in the center of the canvas and felt the crowd and the lights and the noise and was aware of all of it at a remove as though it were happening at a slight distance from where he actually was. He was thinking about Tuesday mornings, Thursday mornings, Saturday mornings, the blue canvas, the water bottle, the gray beard, the pale eyes, the voice saying there, and we don't move on until you can stand right and let the body do what the body knows. The interviewer found him before the official announcement. The microphone, the lights, the face on the jumbo screen. Dawson Briggs, you just submitted Gunnar Cross in round 2. Walk us through what happened in there. Dawson looked at the camera. He thought about what to say. Cross is a great fighter, he said. He's everything the tape said he was. Round 1 was his, and he earned it. He paused. But in round 2, I had some things I'd learned from a guy, and those things worked. The interviewer leaned in. Your coach, Slade Monroe. Yeah, Slade is the best. Slade and the whole team. Dawson paused. But I'm talking about someone else. Someone who came in before the regular training and stayed after. Who taught me things that I didn't know I didn't know. He looked at the camera. He doesn't want me to say his name, so I won't. But he knows who he is. He taught me how to stand. And until you know how to stand, you don't really know how to fight. The official announcement came. The arm raised. The crowd sound. Dawson stood in the center of the cage and let it happen. The post-fight press conference was in a room 2 floors below the arena. About 40 people in it, journalists, bloggers, organizational staff. Dawson sat at the table on the dais next to Slade and his manager and answered the questions that get asked at these things. What was his game plan? How did he feel going into round 2? What did the finish feel like? He gave honest answers. He talked about Slade's adjustments between rounds. He talked about Cross being a genuinely great fighter who had come into the fight at his best and had still lost, which was worth saying, because it was true and because it respected the man on the other side of the canvas. Then a journalist in the second row, a woman who had been at fights for a long time and who asked questions that were different from the questions the other people asked, said, in your post-fight interview, you mentioned someone who taught you how to stand. Can you tell us more about that? Dawson looked at her. He smiled. No, he said. She nodded. Can you tell us anything about it? He thought about it. There's a man, he said. He's older. He's been in things that made him very good at some very specific things. And he was sitting in a gym and I was also in the gym and I said something stupid and he very quickly showed me why it was stupid. He paused. And then I asked him to teach me what he knew. And he thought about it for a while and then he said yes. He looked at the journalist. The rest of it is private, but I'll say this. Everything I did in that second round, the positioning, the angle, the finish, that came from what he taught me, not from anything I already had. The journalist wrote something. She looked up. You said until somebody teaches you how to stand, you don't really know how to fight. That was a striking thing to say. It's a striking thing to learn, Dawson said. When Dawson called Slade from the hotel bar an hour after the press conference, Slade picked up on the second ring. That press conference thing, Slade said, about the man who taught you how to stand. Yeah, Vance. Dawson did not answer. Slade had been around him for 2 years and had been watching for 3 months, and was not a man you could keep things from if he was paying attention, and he was almost always paying attention. You don't have to tell me, Slade said. He asked me not to say his name publicly. I'm not publicly. Dawson was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. Vance. Slade was quiet on his end. Then he said, you know how many people that man has taught in 41 years of knowing what he knows? No, neither do I, Slade said. But my guess is it's a small number, a very small number. He paused. Don't waste it. I'm not going to waste it. No, Slade agreed. I don't think you are. He paused again. See you Thursday. He hung up. Dawson sat at the hotel bar with the phone and an untouched glass of water and thought about small numbers and large windows and what gets passed between people when the people are paying attention and the moment is right. He thought about a Tuesday morning in October and a man on a bench in a split bag and a grin that had not known yet what it was walking toward. He sat there for a while. He thought about how the 48 seconds of round 2 had felt from the inside, not the way he thought it would feel. He had imagined in the theoretical planning phases of camp that if the moment came when the techniques Vance had taught him were applicable, he would have to consciously reach for them, that there would be a decision point where he recognized the setup and chose the response. That was not what had happened. What had happened was that his body had been in a position and his body had known what to do with the position, and by the time his conscious mind had registered what was happening, the sequence was already underway, and the outcome was already in motion. It had been in that moment like watching himself from a slight distance, not dissociation. More the way you watch your hands do something you have done so many times that thought is no longer required. The way a musician's hands move through a passage that has been practiced until the practice is no longer practice, but something else, something that lives in the architecture of the muscle. He had felt the balance go and cross his hips. He had felt it before he had seen it, and his body had responded to what it felt rather than to what his eyes told him, and the response had been right. He thought about the 45 seconds on a hillside in 1971. He thought about what Vance had said. My body did something my brain did not direct. Now he understood what that meant. Not as a concept, in the specific physical undeniable way that you understand something when your body has done it and not just your mind. He finished his water and went to bed. In a house in a quiet neighborhood outside Tucson, a television was on in a living room. The recliner had a man in it, 68 years old, gray beard, bad knee on a pillow, can of beer in his hand. Beside him on the couch, his daughter Pearl in her scrubs from the evening shift not yet changed her feet, tucked under her and her hands around a mug of tea she had made when she got home. Vance watched the fight the same way he watched everything. Still, patient, his face showing nothing that he was not choosing to show. He had watched round 1 without comment. He had watched round 2 with the same silence up until a moment when something happened on the canvas that made Pearl sit up straight and put the mug down on the coffee table. Dad, she said. He did not answer. On the screen, the interview, the face of a 28-year-old man who was going to be offered a major contract in the next 48 hours, and who was standing in the center of a Las Vegas arena talking about a man whose name he was not going to say. He taught me how to stand. Vance took a sip of his beer. Pearl looked at him. She had grown up watching her father's face for the things his face did not broadcast, and had become over 40 years reasonably skilled at finding them. She looked now. The eyes, the corners, not much, not dramatically, just the specific softening that happened in the corners of Vance Holden's eyes when something reached him far enough to show. She did not say anything about it. She picked up her mug of tea. She tucked her feet back under her. Vance turned the television off. He set the remote on the arm of the recliner. He looked at his bad knee on the pillow for a moment. Then he looked at the blank screen. Thirsty, he said. Pearl stood up. She took his can and went to the kitchen and came back with a fresh one. She handed it to him. He took it. She sat back down on the couch. They were quiet for a while. He's going to be good, Vance said. I know, Pearl said. Outside the neighborhood was the deep quiet of a residential street at midnight in October in Arizona. No traffic, no voices. The specific silence of a place where people are asleep and the world is on hold until morning. The knee is better this week, Vance said. Pearl looked at him. I know, I can see it. I think I can start dropping the cane on Thursday. Don't push it. I'm not pushing it. I'm reading it. He shifted in the recliner. There's a difference. Pearl smiled, just slightly. There's a difference, she agreed. They sat. He's going to come back, Vance said. The kid, he's going to want to continue. And Vance looked at the blank television. And I'm going to continue, he said. What else am I going to do? Sit on the bench. Pearl said nothing. She was looking at her tea. The doctor says the numbers are good, Vance said, from last week's blood work. I know, Pearl said. I read the report. You shouldn't be reading my medical reports. You give me the password. I give you the password so you know where to find the will. He took a drink. Not so you can read the blood work. Dad? He was quiet. I'm going to tell him, Vance said, about the treatment. He should know. He's been spending 5 mornings a week with me for 3 months. He's going to want to understand the situation. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I said I'm going to. He looked at her. He's a serious person. Serious people can handle serious information. Pearl looked at her father, the gray beard, the cane across his knees, the beer in his hand, the corners of his eyes. All right, she said. The next morning, 8:30, Desert Iron MMA. The regular crowd was just arriving. Emmett behind the desk. Knox Decker, his arm in a brace, doing single-arm band work near the mirrors. Reed Carver running footwork drills in cage 1. The television in the corner of the lounge had been on since 6. The post-fight coverage had been running all morning. The replay of round 2 repeated the commentators finding different ways to describe what had happened on the canvas in the 48 seconds that changed the fight. Most of the gym had been watching. Emmett had put the volume on for the post-fight interview and turned it up when Dawson started talking about the man whose name he was not going to say. Knox had stood in front of the screen with his braced arm at his side and watched and not said anything. At 8:50, the sound of motorcycles. Not 1 or 2, many. The sound built from the west, the direction of the highway, the specific layered rumble of multiple large engines that people in certain parts of the Southwest recognize the way they recognize weather. It built, and then it leveled, and then it stopped in the parking lot of Desert Iron MMA, all of it at once. Emmett walked to the front window. 43 motorcycles, parked in rows in the lot and along both sides of the street beyond it. Riders dismounting, leather vests, patches, the iron piston bottom rocker on every one of them. The count came from Knox, who stood at the window and counted methodically the way a man counts things when the number matters. He counted twice to be sure. He came back to where Emmett was standing and said 43. Emmett nodded. He had expected something. Not this exactly. He had expected maybe 8 or 10 the chapter officers, the inner circle. 43 was different. 43 was chapters from up the line coming down. 43 was a statement that had nothing to do with words. He thought about Vance sitting on the bench every morning for 6 months, coming in, doing the work, going home. Not talking about anything he had done or anything he was, not performing, not trading on history, just working the knee back to functional and sitting on the bench and drinking from the water bottle. Reed Carver came to stand next to Emmett at the window. He watched the riders in the parking lot. He had been at Desert Iron for 3 years, and he had seen Vance on the bench almost every morning of those 3 years and had never talked to him more than a nod aloud. He said to Emmett quietly, "He's not going to know what to do with this." Emmett looked at him. "Why do you think that?" Reed paused. "He doesn't seem like the type who wants a fuss." "He's not," Emmett said. "But that's not what this is." He looked back at the parking lot. "This isn't a fuss. This is a family." He put his hands in his pockets. "You don't turn away your family." They did not come inside. They stood in the parking lot and on the street in the early morning light, 43 of them, in the specific way that men who have ridden together for years stand together easy in the stance, aware of each other, not performing anything. At the front of the lot nearest the door, a space had been left open. At 9 o'clock, a single motorcycle came from the west and pulled into the space. Vance Holden got off. He had his cane, but he was using it less than usual this morning, carrying it in his left hand rather than leaning on it. He wore the vest. He wore it the way he always wore it, as natural as skin. He stood and looked at the 43 men in the parking lot. None of them spoke. They looked back at him. Something passed between them that was not language and did not require language. 41 years of shared history. 100 roads, 1,000 miles. The particular bond between men who have made the same choices for a long time and understand the weight of those choices because they have all been carrying it together. Vance nodded. 43 men nodded back. He turned and walked into Desert Iron. Emmett was behind the desk. He looked at Vance. Vance looked at him. Emmett said without preamble, "Kid called this morning from Vegas. He's flying back tonight. He wants to know if Thursday is still on." Vance walked past the desk toward the back corner. He set his bag on the bench. He hung his vest on the hook. He sat down and pulled out the knee brace and began putting it on. "Tell him Thursday," Vance said. Emmett nodded. He picked up his phone. Outside through the front windows, the 43 riders of Iron Piston MC stood in the morning sun. They did not go anywhere. They stood because this was the thing they had come to do, and they were going to do it fully without hurry for as long as it needed doing. In the weeks that followed the Vegas fight, the organization moved quickly on the contract. The terms were good, better than what they had been projecting. The performance had landed well with the people who paid attention to how performances landed. Dawson called his manager back from the parking lot of Desert Iron after a Thursday morning session. "The terms are good," he said. "They are," his manager said. "Sign it." "That's it? You don't want to go back and negotiate them?" "Sign it. The terms are fair." That afternoon, sitting on the bench after the session, Dawson told Vance about the contract. He did not frame it as an accomplishment. He framed it as information. Vance listened. He was working on the knee brace. When Dawson finished, Vance did not say congratulations. He said, "What's the next fight?" Dawson almost smiled. "They haven't told me yet. They're working on the matchmaking." "All right," Vance said. He finished with the brace. "You know what's different now? The contract, not the contract." Vance looked at him. "The contract is a piece of paper. What's different is that the people in that organization have now seen what you can do under real pressure against a real opponent in a real situation. They've seen what's underneath." He paused. "Once people have seen that, the conversation changes. They stop looking at your record and start looking at you." He stood up with the cane. "Don't let that go to your head. But don't pretend you don't know it either. That's false modesty, which is its own kind of ego." He walked toward the exit. "Vance," Dawson said. Vance stopped. "How are the numbers from the blood work?" A pause. Then Vance turned. He looked at Dawson steadily for a moment. "Good," he said. "The doctor says good." "I'm glad." Vance looked at him. Something in his face settled. The same softening at the corners that Pearl had learned to find over 40 years. "Me too," he said, and walked out. There was a morning 6 weeks after Vegas when Dawson arrived at 5 o'clock, and the parking lot had one motorcycle in it, and the door was unlocked, and the lights above the back mat were on, and Vance was not on the bench. He was on the mat, standing, waiting. No cane. The knee brace in place, but the cane left on the bench. Dawson stopped. He looked at Vance. He looked at the bench. He looked back at Vance. "No cane," he said. "The doctor said I could try without it," Vance said. "At my discretion." Dawson walked to the mat. He stood across from Vance. He looked at the stance. Vance was standing the way Vance always stood on the mat, the settled, specific stance that was not from any single system, and that Dawson had spent months slowly beginning to understand. "How does it feel?" Dawson said, meaning the knee. "Like a knee that had surgery 9 months ago," Vance said. "It'll tell me if we push it too hard." He looked at Dawson. "Your foot." Dawson adjusted. "Better," Vance said. "Not yet right, half an inch back." Dawson moved it half an inch back. Vance looked. Something in his face settled. "There," he said. They worked for 90 minutes. At the end, sitting on opposite ends of the mat with their water bottles, the gym beginning to fill with the sounds of the early morning session, starting at the far end of the floor, Vance said without preamble, "I'm going to teach you one more thing. After you've gotten the combinations right, something different from the rest." Dawson waited. "I'm going to teach you how to teach it," Vance said. "Not now, a year from now, maybe 2, when you've got it in your body the way it needs to be." He looked at Dawson. "I spent 6 years teaching it to Marines and then I stopped. That was the right decision for the time. I think it's time to make a different decision." Dawson held that. "Why?" he said. Vance considered. "Because the window doesn't stay open," he said. "I said that to you before. It's true of fighting. It's true of everything." He paused. "And because you'll do it right. You'll teach it the way it's supposed to be taught, not as a system with a name and a certificate and a website. as something you put in someone's body because you know what it's for. He looked at Dawson. And because the world has too many men who know how to hit and not enough who know how to stand, he stood up. He walked off the mat. At the door, he stopped without turning. "A year," he said, "maybe 2. We'll know when we know." He went out. Dawson sat on the mat in the morning light of the gym and held his water bottle and thought about years. There were moments in the months after Vegas when Dawson would be in the middle of a regular training session and something would happen in his body, a correction or an adjustment that nobody had asked him to make, that his body made on its own because it now knew what the correct position felt like and moved toward it the way water moves toward level. These moments were small and they were quiet and nobody in the gym noticed them. But Dawson noticed them. He noticed them the way you notice the first real evidence that something you worked for is now part of you rather than something you remember doing. There is a difference between having learned a thing and being a thing, and the difference lives in the body rather than the mind. And it announces itself not with drama, but with these small, unasked for corrections, these adjustments that happen before thought, these returns to position that do not require a decision. He had not had them before Vance. He thought about this sometimes late at night in the specific insomnia that fighters get in the week before fights when the body is ready and the mind refuses to shut down. He would lie in the dark and think about what had changed and what had not changed and what the relationship was between the two. What had not changed: his record, his training regimen, his conditioning, his work ethic, the fundamental physical tools he had been building since he was 12 years old in the backyard with a target taped to a tree. What had changed the thing underneath all of that? The organization at the foundation level, the position from which everything else launched, the stance, the weight, the angle, the specific quality of readiness that Vance had spent patient weeks adjusting and correcting until it stopped needing to be adjusted and corrected and started simply being. He had won fights before Vance. He had been good before Vance, he knew that. But he understood now that he had been building on a foundation whose flaws he had not been able to see because he had never been shown what the foundation was supposed to look like. And you cannot fix what you cannot see. And you cannot see what you have never been shown. He had been shown. He did not take that lightly. He did not think he would ever take it lightly. Some things you receive from another person, and you understand that the receiving carries an obligation. Not a debt exactly, because debt implies repayment, and what you have been given cannot be repaid in kind, but an obligation to use it well, to not waste it, to do with it the thing it was designed for. He had been taught to stand. He intended to stand. Dawson Briggs would not talk about Vance Holden in every interview from that point forward. He would not name him because Vance had asked him not to, and because Dawson understood by now that the man's preference for invisibility was not false modesty, but something structural, something that went back to the specific kind of work that had made him what he was, work that had always required being unseen. But there was a thing that the people who knew Dawson well would notice in the years after Vegas, in the fights that followed, in the way he carried himself in gyms and in camps and in the cage. A quality of stillness. Not the stillness of someone who has nothing going on. The stillness of someone who has everything organized below the surface and does not need to show it. Who has learned to let the room feel it rather than telling them. Vance had said it that first day in the one hand on the shoulder and the quiet words that had been only for Dawson. You don't need to tell them. You just need to be it. Thursday morning, 5 o'clock, Desert Iron. Emmett's door was unlocked. The industrial lights above the back mat were on. The bench was empty. Dawson Briggs set his bag down, put his water bottle beside it, and walked to the center of the mat. He set his stance. He checked the weight. He felt the distribution through his feet, the angle of the hips, the shoulders, the chin. He made one small adjustment, a half-inch back on the left foot, something Vance had been correcting for months, and that was almost right now. Almost. He held the position and waited. At 5:02, the door opened. The sound of the cane on the floor, the bag on the bench, the vest on the hook. Vance walked to the mat. He stood across from Dawson. He looked at the stance. Foot, he said. I know, Dawson said. He moved it a quarter inch. Vance looked. He was quiet for a moment. There, he said. They began.